Welcome to Big Blend Radio with your hosts, Lisa and Nancy, editors of BigBlendMagazine.com.
Hey everybody, welcome to Big Blend Radio with Nancy and Lisa, the mother-daughter travel team on the Love Your Parks tour and publishers of Big Blend Radio and TV magazine, as well as Parks and Travel magazine. Today we're going to be chatting with attorney Marty Glick. He's going to be talking about his book that he co-wrote with another attorney, Maurice Jourdain, and this book is called The Soledad Children, The Fight to End Discriminatory IQ Tests. It's out now, and it really talks about their case and the story of how they achieved a landmark win for farm worker children, especially in California. But I also know that this happened in other parts of our country. It really goes back to the 1960s when California public schools used English language, culturally biased IQ tests to determine placements for students. And it resulted over 100,000 non-native English speakers and other minority students being routed into special education tracks. Can you imagine that, going to school, not understanding the language, and then having to take a test where they ask you who Genghis Khan is and you don't understand, and therefore they decide that you are a special needs child, I would say, or mentally retarded in one part. You can read about this in their book. I encourage you to go to the website martyglick.com. That's M-A-R-T-Y, glick.com, and check out the book. You can go on Amazon, BNN, all the great online stores. Again, it's The Soledad Children. But welcome to the show, Marty. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, and I really appreciate the opportunity to talk with you both. This is fun.
This is a big story, and I don't think a lot of us knew this. I know Nancy and I have covered what happened in society in regards to eugenics and sterilization of especially African-American women. And so this kind of ties in with that, what we were doing way back when, but I think even now we're kind of fighting this kind of issue. It doesn't seem to completely go away, does it?
No, it doesn't. There's this long history, which we do trace in the book, of IQ tests were born for the very purpose, and it was always referred to as mentally retarded at the time, so I used that in the book, pointing out that it's not a term we use today. Right. But IQ tests were invented by Binet for this very purpose, to figure out which children were of such low intelligence that they should be segregated out of classrooms in France, and then picked up in the United States. But when it was picked up in the United States, it was picked up by the eugenicists, who believed that whites were superior, and Hungarians, Italians, anybody who wasn't English or German was inferior and needed to be weeded out. And so you have that period in the 20s that you referred to where there was sterilization and testing, and it was then at Ellis Island. And then it comes back in the 60s in the schools, where the IQ tests are used against farm worker children and other minorities to segregate them out and put them in classes they didn't belong in.
Wow, that's amazing, because you read about Arturo and how it's like he's just a regular happy kid and not understand. I mean, the Genghis Khan, really. How is a little kid going to know, who Genghis Khan is if he hasn't had that education yet?
Even in English.
Yeah.
Right. And then what color were rubies is a question. And why is it better to pay bills by check than by cash for families that don't have bank accounts? And how far is it from Chicago to New York? And on when you look at the questions and then the background of the children, well, they're not going to know that, not because they're not intelligent, but just because they haven't been exposed to it. And then on top of that, being given the test only in English, even if they didn't speak English or didn't speak it very well, of course they didn't do well on the test.
Wow.
Well, yeah, of course not. It's interesting. If you go to a foreign country and you don't speak the language of the country you're visiting, you get the feeling of being left out, and you feel stupid, because everybody's talking to you. Ask somebody a question in English and they answer in a different language, and you just have that look in your face like, what?
Right.
It doesn't mean you're dumb. It's just that's not your background,
And you're self-conscious, and if you can imagine the children, and many of them had some English skills when they came to school, some had none, but they sat in the back of the class, they were shy, and then the teachers ignored them, and then when they didn't do well, they're referred for testing, and that's how the cycle went. And it was the children we represented were in this small town of Soledad, where the prison is in the middle of the Salinas Valley. But then we found that it was a practice in Los Angeles and San Francisco and all over the state, everywhere, so that we were looking at 100,000 children with the current and next generation being put in the classes, and it wasn't just that they were put in the classes. In those classes, they were called names by the other children: retard, tonto, other derogatory terms. Some mothers wouldn't let their children play with children who were assigned in these classes. Oh, yeah. And then in the classes themselves, they cut out pictures from books and had some very rudimentary math, but really weren't taught. So it wasn't just that they were taken out of the mainstream, but what happened to them out of the mainstream made the problem worse.
Wow. Nancy, do you remember this? I mean, you went to school in the LA area. Do you remember any of that kind of?
Yes, I remember the, I forget what you call them, the short hose that, I remember a whole big drama happening with the use of the short hose in the fields. And because it's cruel, man, that you were bending over all day long and trying to chop at weeds and all that. And I remember a lot of drama in the 60s over that. Oh. And I remember my parents were so racist, and we had a lot of arguments because they would say they're not racist. I'm like, yes, you are. Like, we'd go to a public swimming pool because we weren't rich, and if there was any non-white child in, we couldn't go in the water for health reasons. Now, I think that's racist, but they didn't see. They said no, it's common sense.
Yeah, the short hoe was referred to as El Cortito, and that's another case that Mo Jourdain and I brought, actually, with California Rural Legal Assistance, was the case to outlaw, to ban the use of the short-handled hoe in California agriculture. And we had 12 orthopedic surgeons who testified for us that a farm worker by the age of 40 would have the back of somebody who's 70. And there's no cure for that. And that's, so the stereotype of the bent over farm worker is with that use of the short hoe. And it was in California and Arizona. The rest of the country used a long hoe. The long hoe worked perfectly well. And in fact, after the case, some of the growers who were on the other side actually called me and said, you were right. These workers can work longer with the long hoe, and this is much better.
Oh, wow. Wasn't that tied to Cesar Chavez trying to create a movement as well? Because I know he's got a net. We travel to parks, and he's got a park in just outside Bakersfield, I think, focusing on that.
Cesar cared enormously about the short-handled hoe. He got himself injured when he was younger with it, and it was part of a crusade that he had, in addition, of course, to his major work in organizing in California. And so when Mo and I were working on that case, he was very enthused about it and thought it was as important as it was because of the injury it did. And when we first filed and had our hearing in front of the Industrial Safety Commission, they ruled against us, saying that the ban on unsafe hand tools only applied to things that were unsafe within that next moment, like a knife. And so that went to the California Supreme Court, which said, "Are you kidding?" Well, really, they wrote this opinion and said, "Unsafe isn't just unsafe in the moment."
Wow.
Right? If you ingest something that makes you sick, like asbestos, 10 years later, it's unsafe.
Wow.
And so with that reversal from the Supreme Court, that then led to Jerry Brown signing the ban on using the short hoe.
It's interesting to me when you think about, here comes the farm workers, and basically we really owe a lot to what they've done, for America and California, the farming. And yet at the same time, they're going through, oh, sorry, but you can't have the right equipment. And now we're not going to really educate your children. And then, there's eugenics on the other side. I mean, if you look at this whole time frame of the, these issues, they have a really hard time, moving forward in life. So how does a community get together and say, we need a lawyer? Because a lot of times they're going to, I think that when you are a victim of circumstance, you don't feel like you can get help.
That's one of the main reasons that Mo and I wrote the Soledad Children, is because in addition to the story about the cases we filed, it's the story in the 60s of Lyndon Johnson's Great Society and the formation of the National Legal Services Program. Before then, you had public defenders for criminal cases, but if you had a civil case like this, where your children are being mistreated or you're being physically abused by your spouse, unless you could convince somebody in the local bar to take your case, there was no one. And local bar members are busy and they don't want to take on powerful interests. And so created then was the National Legal Services Program, which now exists still 55 years later and is critical. And so we wanted to point out how that changed everything. So here we came to Salinas with 3 lawyers, federally funded, to just take cases to court. If that's all we could do, we had to win. But because we were there, and it talks about some of our early victories for farm workers, then the parents of these children in the class in Soledad learned about lawyers who could help them for no charge and who were on their side. And so that's what happened. And so 2 parents who had gone to school to complain about their children as best they could with their limited English skills, and told by these teachers, oh, don't worry, these are special classes, didn't really believe that. Talked to one of our outreach workers, and so that's how we got them directly involved in working with them and meeting their children, which was an incredible experience.
I bet. I mean, it's when you also look now where we are now. Can that help now with the children that are basically put up in camps and they're cages, separated from their parents? I mean, I wonder about what's going on now. And we have migration happening, and it's not just here. It's a global situation, and as we move into more of climate change, yes, I said that. I'm going to get in trouble. No matter what you do, you're going to get emails. But as we go into climate change, we're going to have more of these migrations happening around the world for basically people needing to, have a life, that's healthy and be in a place where they can thrive and be part of a community. But it seems that a lot of our country doesn't want that or understand that, and it's going to happen no matter where you are in the world. But these children shouldn't be punished over it.
Well, that's certainly true. And what's happened over the years, I mean, the Legal Services Program is established. There's some restrictions that have been imposed on it. But meanwhile, there have been a number of private nonprofit corporations that have come into being. They're funded by the Gates Foundation, major foundations, and others. And so there are organizations working and have been working at the border to try and help parents and children to reunite and get the status that they're entitled to under existing law there. I'm on the board of a terrific organization called Public Advocates here in San Francisco. And the work it does is very much the same. It's aimed at helping, whether it's farm worker population or persons of color, with issues of housing and climate change. Really important because we are going to take action on that front. There is global warming, and so sooner or later, leaders are going to deal with it and create policies. And it's critical that those policies have an environmental justice. That is, that neighborhoods with persons of color and low income are part of that equation, and things that we do benefit them as well as the environment together.
I agree. And I just, the kids, they should have a fair chance. I mean, it's like, how do you expect them to, be the good citizen if you don't help them at the beginning, as when they're in their formation years, that's kind of.
I wonder.
Right.
Yeah, I wonder if part of this with the farm workers is an attempt to not have people educated, because if you're super educated and you go to college, you might want to be a lawyer, you might want to you might want to not be picking tomatoes. So maybe it was, we got to keep these people down so we have people to go out in the field and pick.
There's maybe some of that, but I think the biggest issue is because if you ask somebody individually, almost anybody, how important is education? The visceral reaction is, well, of course, it's incredibly important. But then we undervalue teachers in this country. We don't pay them enough. We give them pensions, and then we say, well, they're too high. And really what we need to do, I'm not saying it's easy, but we need to find ways to support teachers, to make some of our most intelligent and dedicated people want to go into the profession, and have the resources. Because when you take these farm worker children, or you take children in the inner city, they need more attention, they need more help, and the schools are strained. They're underfunded, in fact, and so they're doing their best. Many of the teachers and principals are doing their best with what they've got, but when you have children that has other needs, it's tough. And I think that's some of what was going on in the 60s. It does not excuse what was done in California then in taking these children, giving them tests they couldn't understand, and placing them in a purgatory. That can't be excused. No. And the school psychologists who enabled that, in my view, are the ones who really didn't do the right thing. Yeah,
because if you see that, as a teacher or a psychologist, and you see what's going on, you should stand up and say, hey, but are they doing it because they either believe in that, horrible, way of separating people out, or are they scared for their jobs?
That's a great question. And when we started our litigation, and of course this story is told in the book, the state of California's position was not that no, these children really belong in the classes. They didn't take that position. They didn't say children of color, or particularly farm worker or Mexican American children, are inferior intellectually. But they nevertheless defended the tests. As it moved into the second case we talk about, which was the same case on behalf of African American children, the state actually began to take the position that there were more mentally retarded minority children. So it was kind of a eugenics reborn kind of argument, citing studies that really don't add up to what they cited. And so again, we trace that in the book, as well as then talk about the different views of intelligence tests over time. And what do they really test? Can you really give an intelligence test that will tell you what a child is mentally capable of doing? What is there, some innate capacity? And I think we proved it. I think we proved that the answer is no. Everybody can grow.
I just remember, was it the SAT scores or something? And there were questions like, would you rather play the piano or pick cherries from a cherry tree? And you're like, well, okay, what difference does it make? It's a funny question. We used to look at them like, what are these tests?
Yeah, what does that prove? And especially where you have people are exposed to different things, and if you ask a question about general knowledge, that sort of thing, well, it's going to be as much dictated by what they've been exposed to as by what they can learn. And so that has to be sorted out. One of the important people in our time working was a woman named Jane Mercer, who was a psychologist, and she wrote a book called The 8 Hour Retarded. And her point was that you have these children who, while they're at school, are regarded as special or retarded, or whatever the right label at the time is. But if you study them at home, they're sewing, they're cooking, they're taking care of children, they're doing things, they speak, they engage. And that any system that doesn't look at that, and she developed some scales to do it, isn't properly making judgments about how to educate children.
Wow. It's interesting. When I was in school in South Africa, and it wasn't high school yet, I was in primary school, and I had a really, really bad, horrible teacher, Mr. Vikstrom. No, he really was bad. He was bad, and he did get fired eventually.
I knew you were going to talk about this.
No. I mean, he actually hit a kid's face and head into the desk, all kinds of stuff. And I got in trouble with him. But one of his lessons, and I could not, and I've had some really bizarre experiences in education in different countries. And, I'd always go home to Nancy and go, Mom, what does this mean? And he did this. He stood up and showed the brain and said, Black people have bigger holes and fissures in their brains than white people, so therefore they'll never, it's like the electric current won't work. And I'm sitting there going, are you kidding me? I have Black friends and they're smarter than me. And then they couldn't swim. I mean, this whole thing about their bone density. And then when we watched the Dangerous Idea documentary and they were talking about this eugenics thing, and I'm like, oh my gosh, you know, it's expected in Africa, right, in South Africa, but that guy did eventually get fired, and for some other things too. It's all connected with that personality. But reading your book, I'm like, you know what? We can sit there and trash South Africa for being apartheid, which it was, and it is wrong. But this country has had its fair share of doing this. And people thought that after the Civil War, oh, now everything's perfect. No, it continued on. It really did. And I think this is.
No, it does. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, this is part of it. The IQ test, you know, is part of that. Just, wow. You know, I had no idea.
Yeah. Before Benet, the very first person I knew, this was interesting in the research we did for the case and for the book, the very first guy who developed scales, intelligence scales, his thesis was that you could tell from brain size, from head size, from hand size, from other physical characteristics, you ought to be able to note intelligence. So he developed all that, did the testing, was honest enough to conclude that, boy, that didn't work, and he abandoned it. And then Benet is the one who next came along. And Benet said, don't misuse my scores. The child's mind is like a garden. It can grow. This is not about some fixed ability. But then that was twisted, starting with Lewis Terman at Stanford, as we trace this whole history. He was a eugenicist, and at that time that was so popular. Oliver Wendell Holmes was. Major universities in the United States taught eugenics as part of their curriculum, and that led us into the really restrictive immigration in the 16, 17, 18 period, and these conclusions that Hungarians, Jews, Canadians, anybody different was inferior intellectually and had limited intelligence.
Wow. Where are we now in regards to IQ tests in schools? Is it getting any better?
It's better. It's still, the tests have been improved. The problem is with the label. That will never go away. Too many people, when they hear IQ, think fixed ability to learn. And when that's what a teacher thinks or another student thinks, or the self-image of a student who's given a score thinks, we've done something wrong. I think one of the major uses of it that may make a little more sense, at least, is for gifted classes. But even there, it's going to disadvantage the background of some students who aren't going to score as well, not because of their ability.
But isn't it going to change, the IQ score? Isn't it going to keep changing the more that you experience and the more that you learn?
It does. Yeah, exactly.
So what's
the more you're exposed to. Well, that's right. If you really should be giving the test and calling it an achievement test. If you want to give the test, that test or some other test that actually asks, have you learned this in history or this in math? What do you know right now? So we can design a program for you. Then that makes sense, and that's not suggesting you can't learn. It's understanding what you haven't. And certainly the kids learn at different rates, and sometimes they're 8 or 9 when they accelerate, and sometimes they're going to be limited. But you want a program that will make sense for that child, and stay away from this notion that that some children just can't learn based on their background or where they came from or what they know. A guy named Ted Carasot wrote a great book about a dog, and he talks about how his dog learned, right? And when the dog wasn't on the other side of town, well, he didn't understand things that were there, but once he was exposed to it, his dog learned. Well, this is no different, right?
Yeah.
We have to be, these farm worker kids never went to a zoo. They hadn't gone to a museum. They hadn't even been to a city. And so they don't have those experiences. They're not going to know.
And that's kind of like they were in a camp. It's almost like, when
they were,
like, what they did with Japanese, it's hello, you're going to go live in the camp, and that's that. You are now sheltered. I wonder about what happened to the education of the children, that were in Manzanar and places like that. Like,
Right.
how did that? I mean, it wasn't that long after, you know, when you think about it.
Well, as you know, I mean, our children, the farm worker camp was a former prisoner of war camp down there in Soledad where they were living, and it had been. There weren't the prisoners of war there anymore, but there were the wire fence is still around the camp, as we talk about it in the very first chapter, and that's where these kids lived and where their families lived, and they go out and work in the fields. And they're great people. I mean, they did their best by their children. They're working hard. They pay taxes, all of that. But has zero political power, zero understanding of the system and ability to protect themselves and their children. And when that's the case, people will take advantage.
Wow. You know, it's like being on your own island. It's like being in Cuba or something and not knowing what's going on around you in the other side of the world, you know, just being totally sheltered off. It's a scary feeling. You know, I know you worked in Mississippi as well in the 60s, and going from Mississippi to California, which we look at now as a very progressive state. Expensive, you know, and all kinds of laws. We have a resident attorney, Ward Heinrichs. He does employment law, California employment law. I'm like, dude, what is going on? But you know, so it's interesting to watch. But going from Mississippi at that time frame and then to California, were you shocked at all about how California was about this? Did it compare with Mississippi? Because I know Mississippi has a huge education problem to this day.
My work was different, I would say. In Mississippi, with the Justice Department Civil Rights Division, the first thing I ever worked on, and again talk about in the book, is the murder of Schwerner, Cheney, and Goodman. So we were doing civil rights violence cases. We were doing cases for voting, attacking the system that systematically excluded African Americans from being able to register to vote. Public accommodations law was new. We were enforcing that. So that was kind of the focus there. It wasn't education focused as such. But if you think about it in terms of the way in which a minority population was being treated in one place or the other, there were really similarities. I think I knew a little bit about that, but still, coming to California and then meeting these clients and the children and seeing how they were treated in school, and not just in school, but in the fields. There's supposed to be drinking water that's pure. There's supposed to be bathrooms. There's supposed to be, basic facilities, and they wouldn't be there. So many of our early cases were slam dunk winners that nobody had ever filed because people weren't represented to require those things to happen. And then when the farm workers would try and organize, and then we talk about 2 or 3 cases we filed right early on where farm workers were rounded up and fired. And, well, if you're going to join the union, and the utilities turned off in their camp and with children in an effort to stop the union from coming, kind of like stopping African Americans from voting in Mississippi. And so in that way, there were a lot of similarities. And
we're still fighting the voting thing. Florida finally got somewhere on that this last time. But, and I think that's what I is so important about books like yours, documentaries like The Dangerous Idea and all of that, is that we need to have that education. It's something that is kind of a closed eye on, and you don't know from the past, but it's happening now. Do you think parents of all really need to have that dialogue with their children about what's going on in when they go to school, come back and tell us about the tests you're being given and that kind of thing, so there's that parent-child dialogue so parents know? I mean, that's what I would always go running home to Nancy and going, Mom, this is weird. I don't get it. Why the religious lady said you're going to have an X at the back of your neck because you use a credit card. Crazy. Remember? So there's weird stuff that happens.
Yeah, that was a weird headmaster of a school that when I met him, I was like, I think we need a different school.
Yeah, we moved. But that part of it, do you want parents in specific to read your book?
Oh, of course we do. We want everybody to read the book. But I think the basic answer, and one of the things that really has improved in California, is that a single parent, 2 or 3 families, very hard to have an influence, even if you do get connected to a legal services program or a public interest program. but now, as communities better organized, and there are many community-based organizations, particularly around the school, and share with each other their experiences and their concerns, and are given really the authority, the ability to speak up and be heard. That's what makes the difference. When it's a group, then the school board will listen and the principal will listen, and it'll have an effect. And then you arm the group with, well, okay, here's what the law is on this. And they go in and say when the budget's being drawn up, hey, we want you to do this, or these funds that are supposed to be devoted to us aren't being spent, or in this school, we've got a problem with this teacher. Whatever the issues are, in the best districts now, you have that group of parents, not just the wealthy parents, working with very good-minded, good-hearted principals and teachers who want to do the right thing in many cases, but now they're understanding. Oh, I see. Yeah, well, you've got this transportation problem, or you've got this issue. And some communities that we're working with at Public Advocates, the teachers come out into the community and will go to the work with somebody, and so because the more you're exposed to another person's problems, the better you're going to do.
But everybody understands each other. Well,
Yeah.
So it's community. Everyone is community. That's uniting together. And I think now, also that, there's things like people can talk on Facebook under secret groups and stuff. There's communication that we have now, that there's tools that we can use. There's the internet. There's things. That's why things like, libraries are so important, that we keep them funded. When you think about community and places like libraries where you can go and use the internet and get informed and get that knowledge. If you don't have, the finances to put yourself through another education program, you have that. And I think that's the important thing as a community, is we look at those avenues as well, because they're going to be necessary when you get into a fight or to educate yourself. So thank you so much for all you have done, and also to Maurice Jourdain as well, your co-author, and I was going to co-patriot on kicking people's butts, doing the right thing. So, really, I think that's important, because I don't think also, I want people to understand that lawyers do these things and do help on those sides.
Well, I appreciate it. Yeah, we did this really because we wanted it memorialized. This is what happened in California. Number one, this happened, and let's learn from it. And number two, that these legal services programs, that these people being represented and having their ability to enforce the rights they have is so important.
Agreed. Everyone, again, the book is called The Soledad Children, The Fight to End Discriminatory IQ Tests. Go get on Amazon, BNN, all those places. But if you go right to Marty's website, you can click through to where to get it and learn more about Marty, too. It's martyglick.com. And, of course, we want to thank everyone for tuning in here to bigblendradio.com. And, yes, climate change and global warming's real. Just going to say and get in trouble. But we always love to play music for our guests. And, of course, you, our listeners. And of course, when we talk about these kinds of things, we want to remember community. And this song is called Universal Love. It's by Kwame Benet and the Shakedown out of Harlem, or now New Jersey. So keep up with them at KwameBenetShakedown.com. And this is a song that's really special. And a lot of you are going to recognize it too. So here it is, Universal Love. Thanks so much, Marty.
Hey, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Beyond the boundaries of your mind. beyond religious boundaries and beyond political boundaries. Yes, beyond commercial boundaries and beyond sexual boundaries. Yes, beyond racial boundaries. You give us a love. You give us a love. Beyond the boundaries. We don't need no new religion. We don't need no new savior. What we need is to understand our fellow man and our behavior, to live in love and unity. You live us a lead. You give us a love. Beyond the boundaries. Within your family boundaries and within your tribal